Right now, somewhere in a forest you'll never visit, a deer has frozen completely still. It caught your scent on the wind, not yours specifically, but the scent of something it has never met and yet recognizes instantly as dangerous. Its heart rate is spiked. Its muscles are coiled. And here's what's strange. No one taught it to be afraid of you. No one showed it a human and said, run. So where does that fear come from? And what does it tell us about how deeply we are written into the minds of animals, not as strangers, but as something ancient, something they already know? That question is the thread we're going to pull on today. Because the fear animals feel toward humans is not random, it is not simple. And scientists who have spent decades studying it have found something underneath it that is almost impossible to look at without feeling a kind of vertigo. The relationship between animals and humans, at its most primal level, goes far deeper than we ever imagined. And understanding what animals feel when they perceive us might be the most revealing mirror we have ever looked into. Let's start with something that biologists call the landscape of fear. It's a concept developed by researchers like Joel Brown and John Landre, and it refers to the way prey animals mentally map their environment, not just in terms of food and shelter, but in terms of threat. Every patch of grass, every tree line, every watering hole carries an emotional weight. Animals are constantly calculating risk. And what studies have shown, repeatedly, is that in landscapes where humans are present, that mental map changes dramatically, often more dramatically than when large predators, like lions or wolves, are present. A study published in 2019 Inches, the journal Current Biology found that the sound of human voices alone caused large mammals, elephants, lions, leopards, rhinos to flee at rates higher than the sound of lions growling or the sound of gunshots. Researchers played audio recordings through hidden speakers in South Africa's Greater Kruger National Park. The results were striking. Animals fled from human voices nearly twice as often as they fled from lion calls. Think about what that means. We are not just another predator in their world. We occupy a different category entirely. If you've ever watched a wild animal lock eyes with you and then vanish, you've felt the edge of this. That moment of contact, brief, electric, and then absence. But what's happening inside that animal in those seconds? Is it pure instinct, mechanical and empty? Or is there something it feels, something closer to what you feel, when something you can't name makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up? That's the question scientists have been quietly circling for decades. And if it interests you the way it interests us, this channel lives inside that question, the inner world of animals and what it has to do with us. Consider exploring more of what we have here. Now, here's where the science starts getting genuinely strange. Because not all animal fear of humans is innate. Some of it is learned. And the way animals learn it reveals something remarkable about their minds. Researchers studying coyotes, ravens, and various primate species have documented what's called cultural transmission of fear, meaning individual animals pass the knowledge of human danger to others in their group, not through genetics, but through behavior and observation. Young animals watch older ones react to humans and internalize that response. It becomes part of the group's shared knowledge. This was documented in a striking way with elk in Yellowstone National Park. When wolves were reintroduced in 1995, the elk's behavior changed, but so did their response to humans, because they began spending more time in open spaces where they could see threats approaching from any direction. Researchers noticed that in areas with more human activity, elk calves seemed to learn avoidance behaviors faster than in remote zones. The fear wasn't just inherited. It was being actively taught, passed down, which means it has a social and emotional dimension that we've barely begun to understand. And then there's this. Researchers studying macaques in Japan found that when a dominant individual in a group showed a strong fear response to a human, subordinate members amplified their own fear response beyond what they would show if they encountered the human alone. The emotional state of fear was contagious within the group, which raises a question that might stay with you for a while. If animals can transmit fear emotionally, can they transmit other emotional states about humans too? Can they transmit something like trust? Something like recognition? We'll come back to that. But first, there's a layer here that most people never think about, and it changes everything. Because the fear many wild animals feel toward humans today is not ancient, not in the way we assume. There is a phenomenon that researchers call the ecology of fear, and within it, there's something even more specific. The idea that humans have reshaped animal psychology not over millions of years, but in shockingly short periods of time. Some of it happened within living memory. On islands where animals had no evolutionary history of human predation, places like the Galapagos or certain remote Pacific atolls, early explorers documented something that astonished them. Animals simply didn't flee. Darwin himself wrote about being able to walk up to birds and push them off branches with a stick. He called it tameness, but what he was actually observing was the absence of a learned or evolved threat response. Humans hadn't been written into the local threat system yet, and within just a few generations of human contact, sometimes within decades, that changed completely. The fear was acquired, which means it was, in some sense, about us specifically, not predators in general, us. This is the part where the iceberg reveals just how deep it goes. Because if fear of humans can be acquired that quickly, what does that say about the nature of the relationship? Wildlife biologist Joel Berger spent years studying bison and other large mammals in North America, and one of his most haunting findings was that animals who had no evolutionary memory of large predators, bison, who had never coexisted with wolves or grizzlies, didn't know how to respond to them. They showed almost no fear, but they did show fear of humans. Because in their recent evolutionary history, we were the thing that came and changed everything. We were the force they adapted to. There's a word for this that researchers have started using: anthropophobia, the specific fear of humans. And unlike general predator fear, it seems to operate on a different register in animal minds. A 2021 paper in Trends in Ecology and Evolution described how chronic exposure to the threat of humans, even without direct harm, creates something in wild animals that looks remarkably like chronic stress. Elevated cortisol levels, disrupted sleep patterns, altered social behavior, reduced reproductive success. The researchers described it as a trauma response sustained across generations. Not a single fearful moment, a state of being. And here's where you have to sit with something uncomfortable. Because if animals are capable of a sustained trauma response specifically tied to the presence of humans, then what they feel when they perceive us is not a simple reflex. It involves memory. It involves anticipation. It involves something that functions like dread. The Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, signed in 2012 by a prominent group of neuroscientists, stated explicitly that non-human animals possess the neurological substrates that generate consciousness. They are not biological machines running fear software. There is, in some meaningful sense, someone there. Someone who has learned to be afraid of you. What does it feel like on the other side of that? This is the question we want you to sit with for a moment. Think about an animal you have been close to, wild or not. Think about the moment it registered your presence. Whatever happened in its eyes and body in that instant, whatever shifted that, was a real response in a real mind to the reality of you. And for most animals alive on Earth today, that response carries the weight of a very long and very difficult history between our two kinds. We'd genuinely love to know, have you ever had a moment with a wild animal where the fear seemed to dissolve just for a second and something else passed between you? Leave it in the comments. These exchanges are what this channel is really built on. Now, here is where everything pivots, because fear of humans is only half the story. And the other half is the part that should change how you see yourself in relation to every animal you ever encounter. Researchers studying what happens when human pressure is removed from wild animal populations have found something that no one entirely expected. The reversal of fear can happen fast. In marine protected areas where fishing and human activity are restricted, fish populations don't just recover numerically, their behavior changes. Fish that were highly skittish and evasive in fished zones become, within a few years of protection, significantly less reactive to human divers. They resume natural feeding patterns. They approach rather than flee. What the researchers observed was not just a behavioral shift. It looked like a recalibration of the threat system, like the landscape of fear was being redrawn. This was seen in a different way, with wolves in Yellowstone after their reintroduction, and with large predators in rewilding zones across Europe. But perhaps the most intimate and documented version of this reversal involves something smaller and closer to daily human life. It involves individual wild animals and individual humans in moments that were recorded and studied precisely because they defied every expectation. In 2004, a group of researchers documented the behavior of wild bottlenose dolphins in Monkey Mia, Western Australia, a site where dolphins had been voluntarily approaching humans for decades. What they found was not just tolerance. The dolphins showed differentiated responses to different humans. They recognized individuals, They returned to specific people over multiple years. And the emotional quality of their approach, calm, curious, non-defensive, was categorically different from their behavior towards strangers. The fear was not gone. It was specifically absent for people they knew. And that distinction is everything. Because it means the fear is not a fixed state. It's a relationship. It's a history. The animal's nervous system is not running a simple program that says human equals danger. It's running something far more nuanced. It's tracking identity. It's updating its model of who is safe and who is not. It is, in the deepest sense, making a judgment about you personally. The primatologist Franz de Waal spent decades documenting this kind of differentiated recognition in chimpanzees and bonobos. He observed that animals who had been mistreated by a specific human would show targeted avoidance of that individual, not of humans in general, but of that person, sometimes years later. And animals who had been helped, who had received care or food or protection from a specific human, showed differentiated approach behaviors toward them, not toward humans broadly. Toward the one who helped. This is not instinct. This is memory. This is something that functions unmistakably like emotional history. Here's where the science still struggles to find language adequate to what it's describing. Because what de Waal and others have documented is that the fear animals feel toward humans is not a closed system. It is permeable. It responds to what we actually do. It can be, over time and with consistency, replaced by something else. And what that something else looks like in animal behavior, the relaxed body, the willing proximity, the eye contact that doesn't end in flight, looks, from the outside, very much like trust. Which brings us back to where we began. That deer in the forest, frozen on the wind-carried trace of human scent. What is in its mind in that moment is real. It is not nothing. It is a response shaped by millions of years of evolution and perhaps hundreds of years of specific learned history, compressed into a single instant of recognition. You are in that animal's mind, not as a person, not as an individual, but as a force, as a presence that has been powerful enough and consistent enough to be written into the nervous systems of creatures across every continent. In 2017, a research team studying urban coyotes in Chicago found something that the researchers described as behavioral plasticity in response to specific human signals. Coyotes, who live near areas of high foot traffic, had learned to read human body language, not just presence, but posture, gaze, direction, movement speed, and to calibrate their level of alertness accordingly. They were not just afraid of humans, they were studying us, building a model of us, updating it in real time, making predictions based on it. That is not a simple thing. That is something happening in a mind. And the question it leaves you with is one that might be impossible to fully answer, but is entirely impossible to ignore. If animals have been studying us, learning us, fearing us, updating their understanding of us across generations, what do they know about us that we don't know about ourselves? What does the fear in those eyes reflect back? Not just danger, but history. Not just threat, but the long shadow of what we've been to them, and the open question of what we could become. The orca Tahlequah, who in 2018 carried her dead calf through the waters of the Pacific for 17 days, was watched by researchers who struggled to find clinical language for what they were seeing. The word they kept returning to, cautiously, was grief. And if grief is real in animal minds, and the science increasingly suggests it is, then so is its opposite. Relief, safety, the experience of a threat that does not materialize, the felt sense of being near something powerful that, this time, does not harm you. Every wild animal that has learned to tolerate a specific human, every dolphin that returns, every crow that brings gifts to the person who fed it, every wolf that stops at the edge of the tree line and watches without running, is demonstrating something extraordinary. They are showing us that the fear is not permanent, that it is a response to a history that can be changed, that somewhere inside the nervous system of every creature that has learned to be afraid of us, there is the capacity to learn something different. That might be the most important thing science has told us about the minds of animals and their relationship to ours. Not that they fear us, but that the fear is not the whole story. It never was. If this kind of question pulls at something in you, the inner life of animals, what they feel, what they know, what they think we are, please share this with someone who feels that pull too. And if it moved you in any way, a like genuinely helps this reach the people it's meant for. Because these conversations deserve to be louder. The deer in the forest eventually moves on. The moment passes. But something in its mind has registered and stored the encounter. filed it alongside everything else it knows about the world and what is safe in it. You were there, even though you weren't. And that, somehow, is the most human thing of all, to be present in a mind you will never see, shaping a world you will never fully understand, leaving a trace that outlasts the moment of contact. The question is, what kind of trace you want to leave?